The Garden Wall by Jennie Bishop. Illustrations by Jeff Stoddard. A story of love based on 1 Corinthians chapter 13. In the shade of a great snow-topped mountain lay a green valley. There bridles jingled and cowbells clinked as farmers in the valley planted crops and put their livestock out to pasture in the mountain's shade. A stone-cutter also lived in the valley. He formed stones from the mountain, rock, and repaired the walls in all the farmers' pastures. The stone-cutter had a son named Seth. Seth loved to follow his father into the bright sunshine of the valley as he went to work in the farmers' fields. On these days, Seth often made friends with the farm children. Petra was one of these friends. Sometimes Seth and Petra watched Seth's father make walls. They listened to the sloppy sound of the mortar being smoothed with a trowel, and the clunk of each stone as it landed next to the one beside it. Sometimes they watched Petra's father sow seed. The cool, dark earth came up between their toes, and they fed slippery seeds from their fingers to the hungry ground below. But Petra had an idea about growing something of her own. Seth, she said, I've been talking to God, and I think I'm supposed to make a garden. Seth stared sleepily at the fluffy clouds in the blue sky. Did God say to grow corn or wheat? Petra shook her head. Flowers. Flowers, Seth answered, suddenly startled into wakefulness. What for? For a present, answered Petra, twisting her pigtail as she bit her lip. For my husband. Seth held back laughter as best he could, which was not very well at all. But you don't have a husband. I know, Petra pouted, annoyed by his snickering, but I will some day. Do you think it's silly? No, said Seth. He wasn't saying exactly what he thought, but he didn't want to hurt Petra's feelings. He wasn't sure a husband would like a garden just for looking at. But if you're going to make a garden, you'll need a wall to protect it. That's what I thought, said Petra brightly. Do you think you could build the wall? Seth thought for a moment. His own wall. He had helped his father build and repair walls before, but never built one of his own. Sure, he snorted. Can you plant a garden? Petra rolled her eyes. Pigtails flying, Petra ran to her mother. Mother, I'm making a garden for my husband, she said, breathlessly, but Seth thinks I'm silly. Oh, said her mother, smiling. Well, I don't think you're silly. I'm glad you asked for my help. In fact, here are some seeds I've been saving just for you. Petra cupped her hands eagerly, and her face glowed. Seth passed a hammer to his father in the workshop that afternoon, but did not let go of the handle. His father looked into his eyes. "Son." "Father," Seth stammered, I think I'm ready to build a wall of my own." The stonecutter's eyes twinkled as the hammer hung between them. "Well," he smiled, "I think I have some tools I could spare." Neither Seth nor Petra realized how much patience it would take to make the garden. For days Petra hoed, planted, and watered. Her knees were stained and her back ached. Seth chipped rocks and groaned as he lugged stones to the garden's edge, but he knew the wall was important to Petra. "Are you sure God meant for us to do so much work?" Seth hollered. Petra was strangely quiet. "What's the matter?" asked Seth. "Why aren't you working?" Petra had knelt down on a sharp stone and cut herself, and she was crying. Seth could see that the cut was bleeding and that it must hurt. "I'm sorry," Seth said kindly. "Wait here while I get help." He brought bright, clean bandages and healing ointment from his father, who was always prepared for pinched fingers and scraped knees. Seth found the rock with the sharp edge and threw it far away. "Here, use my jacket to kneel on," Seth offered. But I'll get it dirty," said Petra. Seth shrugged and went back to work on the wall. Seth saw, over time, that Petra really did know how to grow beautiful flowers. He began to look forward to seeing the faces of the daisies and the spikes of the lupines in the garden. He could see that God had given Petra the job of making the garden pretty. His job was to build a strong wall. Petra watched the wall begin to curve around the edge of the garden as Seth chipped and carved and spread mortar. "This wall is like the one I pictured in my mind," said Petra. "It's just right. How did you learn to fit all the pieces together like that?" "My father showed me," answered Seth. "Here, I can show you how too." One day Seth didn't come to help with the garden. Petra weeded and planted as the sun rose in the afternoon sky. Little beads of sweat ran down her back. Seth didn't come the next day, or the next. "Where is he?" Petra thought. "How is this wall supposed to get finished without him?" Seth's father came by later. "Seth's been sick," he explained. "He'll be in bed for quite a while." Petra felt ashamed for her mean thoughts. She sent a fresh new daisy with Seth's father to help him feel better. As the days passed, Petra wondered if she could do some of the work on the wall herself. "Maybe I can keep Seth's wall going up while he's sick," she thought. That way he won't feel as if he has catching up to do when he gets back. So she worked on the wall as best as she could, roughening her smooth hands. For a while she forgot about pulling weeds to give her flowers room to grow, but she knew the wall was important to Seth. Finally Seth was well and came back to the garden. He said, as he inspected Petra's work. You've worked really hard, but there are some places where the wall still has holes. I'll have to tack some stones out and rebuild. Petra was annoyed. I did the best I could while you were gone. Oh, no, I didn't mean that you didn't do a good job, said Seth. You did the best you could, but it's important that this garden is kept safe, or it won't be here for your husband one day, so I need to patch the holes. The next day Seth hummed and chuckled to himself as he patched the wall. I'm sorry I made more work for you, said Petra, still feeling a little guilty. It's not much work, smiled Seth. His face made Petra laugh. Seth went on humming his little tune. Light-hearted, Petra joined in his song. All the birds in the meadow seemed to sing with them, in rhythm with the waving grass. One day Seth came to the garden to find Petra on her knees, in tears. My garden, she cried. What could have happened? Seth looked at what was left of their work. Some of the flowers were uprooted, and others were trampled so flat that they looked like they had been run over by a horse and cart. Part of the wall was lying in pieces on the ground. Seth's eyes flashed with anger. Weren't you watching the garden? He stormed. Petra cried even harder. No, I was with my mother. Where were you? As Seth looked at Petra weeping, his eyes burned with the beginning of tears. It wasn't fair, after all their work. Furious, he stomped away across the pasture. The next morning Petra wandered outside. The garden looked even worse than she had remembered it, and she sat down in the dirt. It was hopeless. Doesn't he know how much this garden means to me? Petra thought. How could he think I wouldn't protect it? The garden is dead, Petra whispered. Petra heard someone clearing his throat behind her, and whirled around to see Seth with two dark-eyed boys. These boys have something to say to you, Seth said. We're the ones who ruined your garden, grumbled one of the boys. Petra didn't know what to say. I've spoken with your parents, Seth said to the boys, and you are going to help us put this garden back in order. That evening, after the boys had gone, Petra thanked Seth. Then she held out a gift. It was a brand new jacket. I was finishing this the day the garden was ruined. It was a surprise. Seth's face burned with shame. He took a deep breath. I'm sorry I blamed you for not watching the garden, he said. It wasn't your fault at all. Will you forgive me? When winter came, Petra and Seth spent more time indoors and saw less of each other. Sometimes Seth came to the garden watching and waiting for the deer that came to look for food there. Venison often found its way onto both families' tables. Petra left to visit her relatives across the valley. Seth offered to watch over the garden while she was gone. "Can I trust you to keep it safe while I'm gone?" Petra teased. "I think I can do that," Seth smiled back. Springtime came and the garden was almost finished. "This part of the garden is very important to me," Petra said as she cradled delicate bulbs in her hands. "But these flowers aren't so easy to grow." Petra and Seth waited and waited for the new flowers to come up. They tended the plants that were already blooming and worked on the wall. Still nothing new showed its head. "Maybe they won't ever grow," said Petra sadly. Seth shook his head stubbornly. "Let's wait a while longer." The sun shone, the rains came, and finally one happy day, the new flowers sprang up from the ground. They grew and blossomed quickly, and fragrant blooms were suddenly everywhere. "Oh," breathed Petra, her nose in a blossom. "It's like perfume. These are the best flowers of all." "Aren't you glad we didn't give up?" asked Seth. "Look at this place." And Seth noticed a flower he had never seen before. It was even better than the ones Petra had planted, and he smiled. "Well, the garden is finished," Petra said to her mother that evening. "Now all I need is a husband." Her mother smiled, and her eyes sparkled. "I have been asking God about that, Petra. I wonder if He has brought one to you already." Petra did not understand her mother's words until the next morning when she saw Seth leaning against the cool stone of the garden wall. Suddenly she realized that the strength of the wall was Seth's strength. Though he had built a wall of stone, it was he who had been protecting her and her garden. Seth was waiting for the best flower to appear. Looking up, he said, "There you are." "I've been thinking," said Seth. "I think this garden needs a gate. Do you want to help me make one?" Petra smiled and nodded. "I do." Seth and Petra spoke to their parents, and soon the gate was built and attached. A date was chosen. A wonderful event was planned, and both families were invited to come and celebrate. On this special day, Seth and Petra stood before the beautiful open gate. They thanked God for the wonderful garden and promised their hearts and the rest of their lives to each other. The families hugged each other and danced and sang outside the garden wall, admiring the beauty around them. The sun began to drop behind the mountains, and the guests left for their own homes, but Seth and Petra stayed near the gate. Seth asked Petra, "Can we really make our own home in this garden?" Seth smiled. "Petra, God made you to plant this garden. God made me to build the wall. God made us to be together, in this place, for always." "I believe He did," laughed Petra. And they went into the garden and closed the gate behind them. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails.